Absolutely fascinating. Now, I want to go to the solar calendar. Now, I'm going to be really honest with you. When I first was reading about it in your series, in your book, on your books, I was like, "What? Solar calendar?" And I mean, because I've just been taught that it's the lunar calendar and Rosh Kodesh, that Kodesh meant, the new moon, but it's not that. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I have been so off on the true calendar. So explain the solar calendar.
Yeah, definitely. So the Essenes had, so there were basically two calendars that were being used during the time of Christ. There was the calendar that the Essenes were using, and then there was the calendar that the Pharisees were using. And when Antiochus, when that whole thing happened, that was part of the deal that I mentioned earlier. They Antiochus wanted the Jewish people, the Jewish leadership, to accept his Seleucid calendar, and it's interesting because when you look at the lunar calendar of the Pharisees that they had, and you compare it to the ancient Seleucid calendar that Antiochus would have had, they're identical. And so the Jewish people that would become the Essenes, that would become to known the Essenes, at the time they said no to that, and they wanted to keep their calendar because. And what's really interesting is in the book of Jubilees, which was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, there was a prophecy about this, where God even said, there's going to be a time where, I gave you this solar calendar, and there's going to be a time you're going to abandon that for a lunar calendar. And God was saying he was against that. And that ended up happening. Well, at least the Pharisees and Sadducees, they made that deal, but the Essenes didn't. So the whole idea of the calendar, the Essenes believed that God gave Adam a solar calendar. And not only is it a yearly calendar, but it's also a calendar that describes all 6,000 years of human history and the 1,000-year Sabbath. So according to the Essenes, there would be 7,000 years of this current creation before a new heavens and new earth. And we know that from the book of Revelation and stuff, but they were talking about that well before Revelation was ever written, before John was even born. And so the way that their calendar worked, it was based on the sun. And the reason that they said it was so important for them to keep their original calendar is because they knew that if they did the feast days wrong, if they did the festivals wrong, especially if they did it on the wrong day, a priest could get killed for that. We see examples of that in the Old Testament where priests don't handle the festivals exactly correctly, and they end up dropping dead because of it. And it was really important. And the way that the Essenes taught is that the reason that's the case, the reason it's so important, is because the earthly temple is a shadow of the heavenly temple. So while certain rituals are being performed in the earthly temple, at the same time, angels are performing certain rituals in the heavenly temple. And we actually see examples of this in the Bible, such as Revelation 8, when the angel has the censer of incense and stuff. Well, when you look at the details of that, that's the Day of Atonement ceremony. Now that's the heavenly one. They're not, in the heavenly temple, angels aren't sacrificing animals or anything like that. We're not given a whole lot of detail about what the angels are doing, but we have a little bit of detail. But on earth, people are sacrificing and praying and doing all this stuff while the angels are performing their heavenly duties as well. And those are supposed to happen at the same time, which is interesting too, because that means, according to the Essenes, time runs the same in heaven as it does earth, which actually makes a lot of sense. But so they wanted to keep the rituals and the festival days exactly on the days that they were supposed to. So they kept the solar calendar and eventually moved to Qumran, and they kept doing their stuff there. So there's a lot of prophecy that can be found in that calendar, not just the year calendar, but just the idea of how they split up this long 7,000 year period. And it's interesting too, because we can go back to the ancient church fathers, and they taught as well, because they got this from the Essenes. The Essenes took the Great Commission and went and made disciples, and some of those disciples are what we would call the early church fathers. And a lot of them talk about how there's going to be 6,000 years of human history and then 1,000-year Sabbath, just like there's 6 days of a week, and there's a Sabbath after that on the seventh day. And then after that, everything would be recreated. There'd be a new heavens and new earth. So the church fathers got that from the Essenes. Well, they also split up this time period into certain segments. So the way that we have, years and centuries and millennia, they had Shemitahs, which was a 7-year period. Then they had Jubilees, which was a 50-year period. They had Onas, which is a 500-year period, and then they had Ages, which was a 2,000-year period. And in their view, there would be it's four. They would call it 4 ages, but it's basically like 3.5. So there would be from the time of creation till the call of Abraham. That's the first age. That's the first 2,000 years, and that's called either the age of creation or the age of chaos. Then the second one, the age of Torah, started at the call of Abraham and went until 75 AD. So just a few years right after the temple was destroyed. And then according to the Essenes, the last age would be from 75, or the church age. The last age would be the millennial age, but the church age, they actually called it the Age of Grace, which is amazing that they even called it that in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Again, 200 years before Christ was born. But they said that would last from 75 AD to 2075 AD. Now, what's really interesting about that doesn't necessarily mean, if the Essenes are right, that we have to wait until 2075 for Christ to return. That's not exactly what that means. So while these time periods, you can basically set these time periods in stone, you can't really set the events that occur in stone. So, for example, the final Jubilee, the final 50 years of the Age of Torah was between 25 AD and 75 AD. Well, think about Jesus' ministry. That was really early on. That would have been from 29, somewhere around 29 AD to 32 AD. That it would have been somewhere around there. Would have been the ministry of Christ. Well, that is really early on in that final Jubilee of the Torah age. The Torah age didn't end until 75 AD, and it's not that a certain event happened in 75 AD that caused anything. It was just that was the time where the next age was to begin. So a lot of prophecies had to be fulfilled in that time. Well, and you see this at the end of each age too. You see, like, the final Jubilee, there's a lot of chaotic stuff and a lot of miracles. So the end of the age of creation was the whole Tower of Babel incident. The end of the age of Torah was the first coming of Christ and everything. And a lot of those prophecies were wrapped up well before the age of grace technically started. So we could see that again in our time. We could see we're going to be hitting 2025, and technically, because the calendars are a little, the Essene calendar is different from our Gregorian calendar. Technically, the beginning of the final Jubilee of our age would be early to mid-March of 2026, technically. But suffice to say, I make a note of that in the book, and then I say, it's just really a lot easier to say like 2025, because that's like where everything's wrapping up, because 2025 to 2075. But we could see a similar thing that we saw in the Age of Torah. We could have all of these prophecies, including the tribulation and everything. We could have that happen early in our final Jubilee. I mean, that could happen next year. That could happen in a few years from now. We don't have to wait all the way till 2075. Now, Jesus could do that. He could decide that he's going to wait till 2075. But all it means is that by the year 2075, 2076, everything should be in place for us to start the millennial age, to start for Christ to start his millennial age. And think about all of the things that need to be fulfilled. It's not just we have a 7-year tribulation, Jesus returns, and then that's it. There's still a lot of things. When you read the end of the book of Ezekiel, there's a brand new temple and a brand new city. How long is it going to take for that to be built? Well, the temple of Herod took about 40 years. And I don't think that Jesus is just going to come down and, again, just snap his fingers and a temple and city are going to appear. I think that's going to need to be built. And so if that takes 40 years, well, you subtract that from, or 40 or 50 years, you subtract that from 2075 and you end up really early in our final jubilee where Jesus would return. So a lot of times when I talk about this, especially on my channel and other interviews and things, when I give that 2075 date, a lot of people get deflated because they're like, "Oh no, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to survive to 2075." And I say, look, it's okay. Like Jesus could come back. Like a lot of things can happen earlier on, and you can have all the judgments of Jesus that gets performed when he returns. You can have all that stuff, and then you could still have decades where things need to get set up. How long does it take to notify the whole world of how things are now? Jesus is reigning, and emissaries from nations are expected to come to tabernacles, and and people have to beat their swords into plowshares. Like, how long does it take to get the whole world up on these new rules? It's not going to be overnight. And then again, especially with the new temple and the new city, and I take that totally literally in Ezekiel. That stuff takes time. So I believe it's very likely that we will have like the tribulation and all this stuff. And I'm not going to set a date to it, but I would expect that it would probably happen pretty early on in our final jubilee, which would be from 2025 to 2075. I don't know exactly what year or anything, but probably pretty early on. Then when Jesus returns, take some time to clean. It's going to take some time for people to clean up the earth. It's going to take some time for all of there's like 4 different judgments that happen at that time. It's going to take some time to build all this stuff and basically get the world ready for the millennial reign, so that by 2075, by that year, everything will be done. Everything will be set in place for the millennial reign of Christ. So to me, that's really exciting. We're living in prophetic and very exciting times.
Absolutely. Yeah. When I first, saw the end of the age being at 2075, yes, I was one of those people too that went, oh no, with everything that's going on. Oh my goodness. And then I would be 1,000 years old by then. So anyway, but when I saw the pattern of what you were talking about, like at the end of the second age, the age of Torah, that Jesus, he died and was resurrected towards the beginning of that Jubilee, which was, so it wasn't at, if it was at 75 that happened, then I'd be like, look at that pattern. But it was the beginning of that. And then I went, phew. It was like, okay, great. Now I've got to ask you, Josh, some people are going to say, oh, well, I really want to get on that calendar. I want to know where I'm at. So where could they see that so they could know, okay, we're at this day as far as the Gregorian, but where am I on the solar calendar? So
yeah. So my very good friend, Dr. Ken Johnson, has developed a free website. It's called dsscalendar.org. And you can go to dsscalendar.org and you can look up any date that you'd like, and you'll get the Gregorian date. So you'll get our date, but then underneath it, you'll also or right on top of it, like you'll also see the Dead Sea Scroll calendar and what things happen on that date. So you could if something major happens in Israel, you can go to that website and look at that date and see if it falls on a festival day or something like that. Also, we have a print version of that, which a lot of people prefer the print version because they can just look at their wall and do it. But we have a wall calendar available, and you can find a link to that at either my website, dailyrenegade.com. I have it right on the homepage, or Ken Johnson's website, biblefacts.org, and I think it's in the store. But if you scroll down, if I remember right, it's right there on his page. But we have print like a wall calendar where on the top you get the normal date with our normal date, but then on the bottom you actually get to see the Dead Sea Scroll date and dates, and you can compare the two. And what's really great about that too, like when I was writing the book, I was trying to figure out a lot of stuff from Revelation, because this is the calendar that the Bible uses. When you go from anywhere from Genesis to Revelation, when you see anything that says, on the third day of the month or on this month, you can track that down with this calendar and actually see, oh, that's why they made mention of that date. It's on, the Festival of New Wine or something like that. Well, you can do that with the prophetic day counts as well. And for me, it's a lot easier instead of clicking around on a website. It's a lot easier for me to just have the print version and then just do the counts. And what's great is with the Essene calendar, all their months are exactly 30 days. And then they had what was called a leap week to make up for that. But it makes counting really easy. So if you want to figure out when the 5 months of the locusts in Revelation might be, you can actually count that out, and you can actually figure it out. It's really interesting because we have this calendar now. We know that 5 months, it's between the days of the Day of Atonement, which I believe that's when the abomination of desolation is going to occur for a lot of reasons that I do get into in the book. But it's the 5 months between that date and then Purim, which is 5 months later. And why Purim? Well, Purim is a Jewish celebration where they'll go out on the streets and they'll celebrate, and it's from Esther, and they give gifts and stuff. Well, I remember when I was a kid, I would read Revelation and I would read about the two witnesses, and it says that when the two witnesses were killed, the Jewish people they were out in the streets giving each other gifts, and I thought that was really weird because I get celebrating, according to these unrepentant people, these two witnesses would have been like terrorists to them. So I understand why they would want to celebrate, but giving gifts, like I remember when Osama bin Laden was killed, and yeah, America celebrated that, but we didn't give each other gifts. It's just a weird thing. Well, that always stuck with me. And then when I learned about what Purim was, it was like, oh, it makes sense. That happens on Purim. So you can actually track this down with this calendar and say, like, okay, the abomination happens on the Day of Atonement, and it has to, because the ceremony that's involved, that's happening, and even in the heavenly temple in Revelation 8, that's all Day of Atonement rituals. And so the abomination of desolation happens on the Day of Atonement. Right after that, right when that happens, the locusts are released. There's like an asteroid and locusts are released. I believe those first few trumpets are pretty consecutive, like within probably a 2 or 3 day period. And they're allowed to torture unsaved people for 5 months. Well, then you get everything with the witnesses, and when you do because we know that the witnesses, their ministry lasts for I think it's 1,260 days. I have it in the book. So you can actually pinpoint right when their ministry starts, and it's in the beginning of the tribulation. There's a big debate on that in Christianity. Do the two witnesses start their ministry at the beginning of the tribulation or the second half of the tribulation? It has to be the first half, because if it's the first half, everything lines up. If it's a first half with a leap week, all of those day counts line up perfectly. But if it's in the second half, it doesn't match up with the calendar at all. So those are just like a couple of small examples on how you can use this calendar, and not only for prophetic things, but for historic things too. You can map out exactly when the flood of Noah happened. You can map out like Moses' ministry on the mountain and when all that happened. And I do that in the book. So having a print version of this calendar is really helpful, because you can take that right along with your Bible, because it's the same calendar that the Bible uses. And anytime that there's a date given, or so-and-so days of whatever month, you can look that up and you can see exactly what it is, and you can even map out prophecy that way. So yeah, again, the calendars are available at dailyrenegade.com or biblefacts.org. And if you just want the website, the free version, it's dsscalendar.org.